If you're from Reno County, there are family names that are instantly recognizable: Whiteside, Collingwood, Carey, and Dillon. 100 years ago, there was another family name that was known not only in Reno County, but throughout south central Kansas: Butler. One of the greatest athletes of the earliest 20th century came from Reno County. Solomon Butler was born in 1895 in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, the youngest of 4 children. His father, Benjamin Franklin Butler, was a slave and a Civil War veteran originally from Alabama. The family left Oklahoma and for a time lived in Wichita before finally settling in Hutchinson in 1909. In 1911, Saul started the 9th grade at Hutchinson High School. Prior to that year, the high school football team struggled to have a winning season. Then, Saul arrived, and for the next 3 seasons, Hutch High would not have a losing season. The team would have a cumulative record of 19, 2, and 3 while outscoring opponents 737 to 180. Football wasn't the only sport Saul excelled at. In the spring, he was on the track team. This is where Saul would really shine. In his 1914 track season, he placed first 6 times, breaking 5 meet records, tying the national interscholastic record in the 100-yard dash, and unofficially breaking a world record in the 50-yard dash. Newspaper articles show Butler running the 100-yard dash in 10.5 seconds and the 200-yard dash in 22 seconds. Even by today's standards, Saul was extremely fast. Saul's abilities did not go unnoticed in the community. In 1913, his coach encouraged him to travel to Chicago and compete in the regional interscholastic meet at Northwestern University. Through the financial aid of local Reno County businessmen, Saul was headed north. He placed in every running event he entered, but the broad jump is where he made headlines by breaking the meet record and tying the world record. At a meet that had 300 track stars from all over the Midwest, most of which played as teams, Saul placed 4th overall as a team of 1. But not everything was picture perfect for Saul while living in Hutchinson. While Reno County held him in high regard and were proud to call him a native son, the rest of Kansas was not so welcoming. Pratt High School refused to take the field as long as Saul played. Great Bend and Wichita high schools had similar prejudices. Sometimes, referees were the ones causing problems for Hutch High. Traveling as a team was also not a simple matter. Many restaurants and hotels refused to serve the team because of Saul. In his senior year of 1914, Saul made the decision with, quote, "deep regret that I finally left dear Hutchinson High. After discrimination from the high schools in Pratt and Wichita, I felt that Hutchinson was not getting a square deal in the matter. As much as I hated to leave, I would do better to enter athletics in a different state where I would have a better chance of continuing my work without such an abundance of objections and hard feelings." Saul would say he had always been treated well by the people of Hutchinson and hoped it would allow his teammates to play whichever opponents they deemed fit. With his brother Ben as his unofficial trainer, Saul followed his track coach to Rock Island, Illinois, where he finished high school as a football and track sensation. His winning streak carried from Hutchinson High, and Rock Island had a tremendous season, outscoring opponents 257 to 49 and finished with a record of 5, 2, and 1. The following year, he enrolled at Dubuque University. It was here that Saul etched his name in history by being the first black man to quarter a university team for all 4 years of college. He became captain of the track team, joined the basketball team, and the glee club. No matter what Saul did, he was a success. Shortly after graduating in 1919, Saul joined the Army. He traveled to France and participated in the Inter-Allied Games that summer. This event put Saul not only on the national stage, but the international stage as well. During the games, he took the gold medal in the broad jump with a distance of a staggering 24 feet, 9.5 inches. He received a special commendation from General Pershing and was knighted by the King of Montenegro. After coming home from France, Saul returned to Hutchinson to participate in the Emancipation Day celebrations. Saul stayed in town through 1920 before continuing his athletic career by heading to the Olympics at Antwerp that year. Butler was favored to win the broad jump, and his qualifying jump was only 2 inches shy of the world record. Sadly, on his first jump, he pulled a tendon and could compete no longer. The gold medal went to a Swede that jumped only 23 feet. Saul would routinely jump in excess of 24 feet. After the Olympics, Butler returned to the Midwest and began to play professional football for the next 3 years. He is often regarded as the second African-American quarterback in the NFL after Fritz Pollard in 1921. In 1926, he joined the Canton Bulldogs and was teammates with Jim Thorpe, another legendary sportsman. When playing as a visiting team in large cities, Butler faced intense racism. That year, he was forced to sit on the bench during a game with the New York Giants after they refused to take the field while Butler still played. By 1934, most black players had been dropped entirely from the sport. After leaving professional sports, Saul spent time in Harlem, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles before finally settling in Chicago in 1940. While living in these cities, he tended to live within the confines of African American areas, but would often use sports as a unifying force for racial integration. Saul was even known to carry out formal surveys among players to get a better idea of how racial tensions were affecting them. He trained prize fighters and coached high school baseball. Saul also branched out by becoming a sports writer for a Chicago minority-owned newspaper and into music as a record producer, working with many artists including Paul Robeson, whom he met while playing football. Robeson would eventually find himself at the forefront of the civil rights movement. By 1954, Butler was operating a successful bar in Chicago. One evening, a drunk customer became unruly and began to harass several women in the bar. After Butler threw the man out, he came back a short time later and began shooting into the bar. Butler was hit twice, killing him. His death was widely reported in his hometowns of Hutchinson, Dubuque, and Chicago. Today, Dubuque continues to hold the Solomon Butler Classic track meet on an annual basis. The halls of Hutchinson High have not heard Saul's name spoken in decades, and yet some of his records still stand today. Saul traveled widely in his life, but ultimately he called Kansas his home. He is buried in Maple Grove Cemetery in Wichita, along with his mother and siblings. His father is buried in Eastside Cemetery here in Hutchinson. At the Reno County Museum, the staff wants to revive the memory of a man who carved his name in history around the country and abroad. His formative years were spent in this community that gave him the courage and tenacity to achieve his goals and break barriers in ways that should make all residents of Hutchinson proud.